The Man Who Was Buried Alive, Twice, A Tale of Fear and Mystery. In 1915, a man woke up in complete darkness. His chest felt heavy, his breathing shallow, and when he tried to move his arms, they hit a solid wall of wood. Panic surged as he realized the horrifying truth: he had been buried alive. But that was just the first time. What happened to this man defies logic and will leave you questioning reality. Our story begins in the small town of Claiborne, Tennessee, in the early 1900s. The protagonist, William Billy Harrison, was an unassuming farmer in his late 30s. He was known for his quiet demeanor and a peculiar fear, the fear of being buried alive. Billy's fear stemmed from a childhood experience. At the age of 10, he witnessed the burial of a local woman who was later found clawing at the inside of her coffin during an exhumation. The sight haunted Billy for the rest of his life. In the spring of 1915, Billy came down with a severe fever. Doctors were called in, but their treatments failed. By the end of the week, Billy was pronounced dead. His family, grieving and overwhelmed, organized a quick burial due to the warm weather. 3 days later, as the graveyard caretaker, Henry Caldwell, walked past Billy's freshly dug grave, he thought he heard something. At first, it sounded like a faint knocking. Henry dismissed it, chalking it up to his imagination. But the noise persisted, growing louder and more frantic. Unable to ignore it, Henry called for help, and together with other townsfolk, they dug up Billy's coffin. When they opened it, their worst fears were realized. Billy was alive, his fingers bloody and raw from scratching the coffin lid. His eyes were wide with terror, but he was breathing. The townsfolk pulled Billy from the coffin, and though he was weak and traumatized, he survived. Over the next few weeks, Billy recounted his horrifying experience. He had been conscious during the burial, but his body was paralyzed, a condition now known as catalepsy, where a person appears dead but is fully aware of their surroundings. Billy's story spread quickly, earning him the nickname the Man Who Escaped Death. While most people were fascinated, Billy was plagued by the experience. He became reclusive, refusing to leave his home. He often muttered about shadows he had seen while trapped in the coffin, shadows that didn't belong to the living. His wife dismissed it as trauma-induced hallucinations. But Billy's behavior grew stranger. He began carving crosses into the walls of his home and insisting that his coffin had been visited by something unholy. He refused to explain further, saying only, "They'll come back for me." Years passed, and Billy seemed to recover. He resumed farming and even joined the local church, where he became deeply religious. But his fear of being buried alive never left him. He drafted a will with explicit instructions. Upon his death, his body was to be left above ground for 3 days to ensure he was truly dead. In 1922, 7 years after his first burial, Billy suddenly collapsed in his barn. This time, there was no fever, no sickness, he simply dropped to the ground. A doctor examined him and confirmed he had died of heart failure. Billy's wife, Mary, remembered his instructions. She begged the local undertaker to wait 3 days before burying him. However, as was common at the time, the undertaker ignored her request, citing concerns about decomposition. Billy was buried the very next day. What happened next defies explanation. On the night after Billy's burial, a massive storm swept through Claiborne. Lightning struck the cemetery, splitting a large oak tree in two. The following morning, Henry Caldwell, the same caretaker who had saved Billy years earlier, found Billy's grave disturbed. The ground was sunken, as if something had moved beneath the surface. Henry, recalling the previous incident, gathered a group to exhume the coffin. What they found chilled them to the bone. Billy's coffin was empty. Panic spread through the town. Some believed Billy had once again been buried alive and somehow escaped. Others whispered darker theories, that whatever shadows Billy had seen in his coffin had finally claimed him. The townsfolk searched the surrounding woods for days but found no trace of Billy. Rumors began to circulate. Some claimed to have seen him wandering the forest at night, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Mary, devastated by her husband's disappearance, began to experience strange occurrences at home. At night, she heard tapping sounds on the walls and windows, reminiscent of the knocking Henry had heard at Billy's grave. She also found fresh crosses scratched into the walls, despite having painted over them years ago. One evening, Mary awoke to find a figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was Billy, or at least, something that looked like him. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and his expression devoid of emotion. He said nothing, simply staring at her before vanishing into the darkness. Over the next few months, Mary's health deteriorated. She confided in the local priest, Father O'Malley, who performed a blessing on her home. During the blessing, Father O'Malley uncovered something strange, a small wooden cross hidden under Billy's bed. Carved into the cross was a single word: they. Father O'Malley took the cross to his church for further examination. That night, the church caught fire under mysterious circumstances. The cross was never recovered. Mary's health continued to decline until she passed away in 1923. With her death, the strange occurrences stopped, but Billy was never found. To this day, the story of William Billy Harrison remains one of Claiborne's most unsettling mysteries. Was Billy truly buried alive twice? If so, how did he escape the second time? And what were the shadows he claimed to see in his coffin? Some believe it was simply a case of misdiagnosis and human error. Others insist darker forces were at play, forces that didn't let Billy go even after his first brush with death. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: Billy Harrison's story is a haunting reminder of how little we understand about life, death, and what lies beyond. And with that, we conclude this strange, dark, and mysterious tale. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more chilling content. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.